very grateful to Father Peter, to Father Michael, for inviting me to take part in this intellectually rich convocation. I will speak on governance, concept and approach. It was easier to speak about governance before 2016, annus horribilis, in which the symptom of democratic fatigue, as it has been called, manifested itself in different forms. Brexit, Trump's offensive and post-truth electoral campaign, the rising wave of right-wing xenophobic populism in Europe, Russia's electoral intrusion damaging democratic process and outcomes, the humanitarian catastrophe in Syria, the refugee crisis, the overflow of migratory phenomena, among other topics. We are living in an uncertain time where fears can lead us to look for quick and easy answers that are often wrong and harmful. Not to mention opposed to the founding values of the Western tradition that was in large part created and framed by Christianity. By the way, allow me to suggest you to read two recent and provocative books published 4 or 5 months ago. The first one is written by Jason, not Patrick Brennan, is Against Democracy, Princeton University Press. The second book is written by a Belgian professor, David van Rijbroek, is Against Elections, the Case for Democracy. Let us get into our subject, the shift from government to governance. The shift from government to governance is an expression that sums up the changes taking place in reality and in the study of government, public policy, and public administration. Governance as a concept and approach is new and attempts to provide an answer to a new question, the question on the ruling capacity and efficacy of democratic governments in contemporary society. The question of whether governments are really capable of governing, leading, coordinating is now the most relevant and worrying question today when most countries, developed and underdeveloped ones, are undergoing economic decay, distressing social changes, and political delusion. The shift from government to governance has been triggered both by factors internal and external to government. Internal factors include budget deficits, fiscal crisis, poor political representation of citizens, corruption, etc. External factors include economic globalization, cultural globalization, the dominance of financial capital transactions, political and ethical plurality, and the growing individualization of society, breaking traditional social bonds, etc. The combination of both the internal and external factors have altered government-society relations, and hence cognitive and political attention moved from the study of government as agency, institution, bureaucratic arrangement, to study the process by which government rules, steers society, determining the conditions that enable a proper and effective steering process under contemporary circumstances. The shift from government to governance has two main reasons. First, the illegitimacy of government is no longer a pressing problem. was solved by reinstating the rule of law and by democratizing political regimes. Second, the problem of cost inefficiency or cost ineffectiveness of governmental public policies and services, even if protracted and aggravated, is no longer relevant. There are many measures, policy adjustments, public management, new public management, which allow us to deal with those problems. Rather than inefficiency, the present problem is the government's insufficiency. The government's insufficiency for ruling, steering, and leading the society. Governments by themselves lack the resources, financial, cognitive, organizational, even moral, like credibility and social trust, required to govern, build a sense of direction to society, safeguard the founding values of society, protect citizen rights without exception or discrimination, solve public problems, etc. And the traditional ruling tools of governing, command and control, through regulations, bureaucratic procedures, police enforcement, etc., have lost effectiveness when addressing a number of contemporary public problems which have a highly complex configuration and are effects of various entwined causal chains that becoming unmanageable by the government's usual hierarchical tools and its available resources. The complexity of society is the main issue, but we are not to address this afternoon. Furthermore, the relative inefficacy of the traditional hierarchical model of government is the consequence of a proactive civil and economic society that is politically independent, powerful, informed, cognizant, and is unwilling to simply abide by governmental decisions that affect personal and social lives, particularly when those decisions are considered mistaken or unfair. This proactive civil and economic society, therefore, demands access to both the public decision-making and the implementation process. On the other hand, a dynamic knowledge society, economic society, has shaped economic output, labor, transactions, communication, the well-being of society, as well as its evolution. This knowledge society of autonomous individuals, corporations, organizations with interdependent links has the capacity to question unfounded policy decisions, lacking in proven scientific knowledge, as well as to provide scientific technical validation in the form of counsel and engagement in the public decision-making process. Definition of governance. It's important to have a clear and robust definition of governance. Public governance refers to the process by which a society steers, rules, and manages itself, meaning essentially the process by which government, private corporations, civil society organizations, and citizens interact to define, agree, and decide on the founding values of their common life, on their common goals, and on the organizational forms, exchanges, kind of resources, and set of activities which are necessary and fit to carry out successfully the chosen goals and the guarantee common values. What is important is that governance process is structured. It's structured by institutions and by knowledge. On one hand, the governance process implies values, institutions, rules, traditions, which establish the ways and limits of the exercise of public power and the channels open to citizens to participate in public decisions. Institutions regulate as well the interactions between public authorities, private corporations, and civil society organizations in order to articulate their interests, meet their differences, and reach agreements on public issues. On the other hand, public governance also implies scientific technical knowledge that enables the public, private, and social actors to determine the proper causal activities to produce effectively the agreed upon public goals, as well as the efficient allocation of public and private resources. Institutions determine the social legitimacy of the governance process, while the knowledge systems defines its feasibility, what government, together with society, can do. Governance is an intentional process oriented toward specific common goals and ends, which refer to a socially accepted value system, and it is also a performative process committed to achieving the common ends and goals, which refer to a socially accepted knowledge system. So, hence, the governance process has two essential dimensions, a value dimension and a technical scientific dimension. Governance in sum relies on criteria and assertions of truth, cognitive validity within the value domain and within the technical scientific domain. What is to be avoided in the present is that technical result, an instrumental result, overpowers substantive reason. Moreover, stronger emphasis should be placed on the relevance of dialogic reason, of conversation, through which the political and social actors build, debate, test, and validate its propositions and assumptions. Three types of governance have taken place throughout social history. Excluding the recent governance by markets, the public governance has three types. All types of governance are dependent on how government and society interact to determine their values and objectives, the organizational forms, the resources, and the causally most effective actions to achieve the desired ends. It is well known that government, at times, has been the sole decision maker regarding governance, in large part due to inabilities, unproductiveness, conflict, crime, violence, internal divisions in society. In other instances, society has exhibited capability of self-regulation, integration, economic growth, and stability. Most recently, government and society are becoming interdependent, acknowledging their complementarity, which is necessary both to outline their objectives and also to achieve them through dialogue, negotiation, agreements, and partnerships. The first type is the called governance by government. That is the hierarchical governance. But there is also self-governance by society. There are multiple examples, old and new, of society's self-governance as a whole or in specific societal issues. The subsidiarity governance belongs to this second type. We have lived in governance processes by government, but there are alive a lot of processes of society self-regulation. But the final contemporary type is co-governance. That is the modern governance, which takes place when government and society recognize that they depend on one another to achieve their objectives. It's governance through conversation, co-decision, co-production, cooperation, and co-responsibility by means of networks, alliances, public-private people partnerships, and so on. From this long review, I would like to highlight the following ideas related to the stewardship of knowledge and evangelization in our culture. Truth, cognitive validity, is still present and increasing in relevance for modern contemporary governance. Though we observe post-truth politics that mobilize social prejudices, fears, and irrational biases, the encouraging fact is that governments cannot effectively lead without referency values, which demand rational validation and defense, and without relating causes, which demand an empirical assessment. Every social time demonstrates that power is not the last reference. If today the central question is on the capability of government to steer the society because it's insufficient, the implication is that governments will not be able to be leaders or directors if those in power make decisions not sustained or endorsed by ethical reason and empirical evidence. Our church has a key role to play, calling for good reasons. My second comment is on government's insufficiency. A new steering process has emerged centered on the feature that the government depends increasingly on other organizations, economic and civil, to set a public agenda and to achieve public goals of common interest, just as corporations and civil society depend on the state's performance to achieve their own goals. The interdependency, complexity and interdependency in the contemporary society are linked. The interdependency of the constituent parts of the contemporary social system fosters a way of governing which is necessarily less hierarchical and more shared with citizens through partnerships networks in which state and other organizations depend on each other. The present situation opens opportunities on certain matters for economic agents, civil society, and for the church itself to keep vigilant oversight on the decision-making process in governance in order to uphold the validity of fundamental human and social values founded on intellectual reason, and to advocate a trustworthy and truthfully governmental discourse. A deaf government to the voices of key sectors of society loses legitimacy, trust, and support, and condemns itself to a contested leadership. The third point is on subsidiarity governance. A form of government and policy principle in accordance to the church social teachings. And subsidiarity governance is bound to become more and more the future governance pattern in those societies which have reached high levels of information and knowledge, large economic output, self-regulation, cohesion, and wide social capital, regardless of its multi-ethnic or multicultural composition. Well, I think that to preach, to vindicate, validate, and explain the ecumenical, global message of human dignity, rights, liberty, and responsibility is the eternal mission of the church, when referring to the secular, social, and political components of human life. Thank you very much.